Hello everyone. Thanks to everyone for watching this video. My name is Qida. I am an architect and engineer. Today's video is titled Ancient Rome, and it is going to introduce the Temple of Portunus and the Pantheon construction using Roman concrete. I am going to give you an overview of what I'm covering in today's video. First at all, it is an introduction of ancient Rome, and then focus on the Temple of Portunus and the Roman concrete before wrapping up with conclusions. Rome began as a small village on central Italy's Tiber River. In the coming centuries, it grew into an empire that stretched from the North Atlantic all the way to the Persian Gulf. During this transformation, Rome displayed a political, military, and cultural prowess that enabled it to become a superpower and helped shape what would become known as Western civilization. This massive scale and growing populace necessitated advancements in Roman engineering. Aqueducts were constructed, which increased the public's access to water, helped improve public health, and paved the way for Rome's famed bathhouses. A 50,000 miles long road system was built as well. While made originally for the military, it improved the movement of people and ideas throughout the empire. However, no other civilization influenced the Romans as much as the ancient Greeks. Their influence is probably most apparent in Rome's art and architecture. Upper-class Romans commissioned paintings and sculptures to imitate Greek art. Greek architectural styles, such as columns, were implemented in Roman structures, such as the Pantheon and the Colosseum. Temples are one of the traditional Roman architecture. We can look at the Temple of Portunus in Rome, nearby Tiber River. It was put up in the early 1st century BC, a traditional Roman building, though that was quite derivative, that looked back at Greek architecture and Etruscan architecture, and drew elements from both of those and combined them together into what we term a new Roman creation, at least in the traditional vein. The Etruscan elements of this particular monument include its tall podium, its deep porch, the freestanding columns in that porch, the single staircase, and the emphasis on the facade that having that single staircase achieved. While there are columns all around the structure, it is actually a Greek way of doing things, that those columns are tacked or engaged into the wall, which still give it a certain sense of flatness, including on the back, that is also characteristic of the Etruscan architecture. The Greek elements are incorporated here, and those include the building was made out of stone, and also one of the traditional Greek orders. In this case, the Ionic order was used for the structure, so this bringing together of Greek and Etruscan elements in this Roman building. But the building we call the traditional Roman building. All the traditional Roman buildings share in common the following features. They have columns and they have walls, and those columns and walls serve a structural purpose, and that is to hold up the flat or the sloping ceiling. But at the same time, in the 2nd century BC, we begin to see a new kind of experimentation that is going on concurrently with this. And what made this experimentation different than anything that had come before is the fact that the Romans used for these buildings a completely new material, and that material is concrete. Roman concrete is different from what we think of today as concrete. It's a composite of various natural elements that becomes a liquid mass when mixed with water and eventually hardens into a very strong substance, much stronger than any of its ingredients on their own. Roman concrete was a mixture of stone rubble and liquid mortar, and composed of lime, sand, and something called pozzolana. Pozzolana being a volcanic substance, which was very plentiful in Italy, especially around the area of Pompeii. Concrete can be cast in any shape, at least any shape that a carpenter can build with wood, and like modern builders, the Romans erected wooden frames for their walls and ceilings, and they poured concrete into those wooden frames. The introduction of Roman concrete into Roman architecture freed the Roman architect from the confines of a rectilinear architecture that they had inherited from the Greeks. The kind of rectilinear architecture that made up a temple like the Temple of Portunus. This is a very momentous change and one that will have a lasting impact on the buildings of the Romans. Perhaps the greatest concrete structure built by the Romans was the Pantheon. It's a very distinctive and innovative temple, because when you look at it from the front, you see it has a kind of traditional porch. It is with the columns that support a pediment, and looks like earlier Greek or Etruscan architecture. What is very innovative about it is that once you go into the building, you see that this is all about an extraordinary interior space that is shaped by light, that is shaped by genius, essentially. In fact, the dome of the Pantheon, which would not have been possible without concrete construction. Now it is interesting to compare the Pantheon to an attempt that Etruscan architects made to create something similar, but out of stone. An Etruscan tomb is shown on this slide, and it was built at Quinto Fiorentino, around 600 BC. What the architects have done here is to try to create a round tomb, and they have used stone, as you can see. They have laid those stones. They have tried to cut them in the shapes that they need, in order to make this work. And you pile them, one on top of the other, row after row after row. It starts out okay at the bottom, but as they get further and further onto the top, and it gets rounder and rounder, and converges at the apex, they start to have trouble, as you can see. And although it's a heroic, a valiant attempt on their part, it isn't terribly successful, at least aesthetically. In fact, they were worried about it falling down, so they even had to place a stone pier at the center to support the dome, to make sure that it didn't drop. But with the introduction of concrete into architecture under the Romans, building a dome like the Pantheon was simplicity itself. All you need to be able to do was to build one of these wooden structures that you then pour the concrete into the construction, and you have the dome of the Pantheon. From conclusions, what we learned: the Temple of Portunus is a Roman temple in Rome. The rectangular building consists of a tetrastyle and cella, raised on a high podium reached by a flight of steps, which it retains. It has a pronaos portico of 4 Ionic columns across and 2 columns deep. The temple combines Greek and Etruscan architecture. Roman concrete was based on a hydraulic setting cement. By the middle of the 1st century, the material was used frequently, often brick-faced. Although variations in aggregate allowed different arrangements of materials, further innovative developments in the material, called the Concrete Revolution, contribute to structurally complicated forms, such as the Pantheon dome. Okay, thanks to everyone for watching my video today, and I do hope you found the video informative, and that you learned some things from it. If you do have any questions, then you can write comments and messages. I am happy to answer any questions. Thanks for your watching.